TDP. Yes, this is probably not ideal to do it in 40 minutes, but what we wanted to do was provide you guys some updates on some things that have occurred here in the last year on nutrient management as it relates to the state of Ohio. If you're not aware, my primary role is working with H2 Ohio, and so we've had about 1.1 million acres enrolled in H2 Ohio, and we need nutrient management plans on those acres. And so we've had a lot of nutrient management related questions. And so today we want to provide a 30,000 foot, maybe it's 100,000 foot overview of some ideas of nutrient management and the updates to Tri-State and NRCS 590, and kind of where we're at and what we want to do moving forward. If you're not aware, we're just started here at Soil and Water. Nutrient management is the topic right now. If we look through soil and water history, we've had no-till, we've had different erosion practices, but right now, nutrient management is our primary focus when we talk about priorities from the state's perspective. So what we wanted to provide today was just kind of a update on where we're at. So first thing I want to go through today is what is a nutrient management plan and what are some of the responsibilities of the district. Next, I wanted to go through the updates to Tri-State and 590. Then just kind of that 100,000 foot, 30,000 foot, whatever altitude you want to fly at, nutrient management planning. And so this is going to just give you some ideas to think about. And then finally, just wanted to show you and make you guys aware of the OVNMP spreadsheet that we put together and we keep around for nutrient management planning. I'm not going to spend much time on it today. I'm just going to show everyone it's there, available. Certainly it needs some updates with the new Tri-State coming out, but with the 590 standard also getting updated, we want to make sure it's consistent with that also. So we're working on that process, and we hope to continue working in this nutrient management field. And so we're really excited that we have an opportunity to get some information out to you today. So from a very high perspective, we've had a lot of discussion going back probably till Grand Lake St. Mary's in 2011, and before that even, when it comes to nutrient management. And when we boil things down, we really want to maintain a handful of these ideas for nutrient management. So if we started out at its most basic criteria, or the basics of nutrient management, it all boils down to a soil test. The crops are going out there, and what are your yield goals? What nutrients are we using out there on that farm to meet those nutrient goals, if there are some needed? And then are we applying less or more than we are removing through the grain or tonnage if we're talking about hay and so on? So if we can remember these simple thoughts about nutrient management and keep that in perspective, we can write a nutrient management plan. So when we're talking about nutrient management plan, the Ohio Revised Code defines it as one of three formats. The first one is an OSU workbook. Many of you who've been around for a while have probably seen these OSU workbooks. They're, I think, a half sheet paper folded, and it's a paper document that you can fill out and write a nutrient management plan. They also have an electronic version that is in Excel, and that is defined as a nutrient management plan by the state of Ohio. There are some deficiencies with it. It's only a one-year plan. It's all handwritten. You have to constantly update it, but it is a nutrient management plan defined by the state of Ohio. We have had a few done recently. I have not seen very many get done through the Ohio Nutrient Workbook. The second one is a comprehensive nutrient management plan, and that's a nutrient management plan primarily focused probably with manures, and that's where we most commonly see CNMPs done is with manures, but we could write a nutrient management plan that's up to the 590 standard for non-commercial or non-manure also. And so we could use that format to write a nutrient management plan. And the last is a form approved by the director or the director's designee. This is the OVNM spreadsheet that we put together several years ago, and it fulfills the final format here that's defined by the state of Ohio. So I'm going to quickly go through that, what is in that and what is required in that nutrient management plan. So the first thing, as I said, with that first theme of nutrient management, a soil test no older than 4 years. So we need a relatively recent soil test so we can inform our nutrient management decisions based on a soil test. The next is the method and seasonal time of utilization and application of nutrients. So when are we applying them? How are we applying them? What considerations do we make there when we look at nutrient management? The next thing is identification of all nutrients. So this really comes into the, are we using manure? Are we using commercial fertilizer? Are we using both? Do we have access to biosolids? We need all that information recorded and documented in that plan. And the last thing are, where is it getting applied? What crops are being grown out there? And what are our yields out on those fields? So if we can identify all those, we can write a nutrient management plan. These are the primary things that we look at when we're looking at using the Ohio Voluntary Nutrient Management Plan spreadsheet. Is those minimum requirements. We certainly can have additional stuff, and it can make a much nicer plan. But when we're looking at an OV and NP and approving it, we must have the minimums in there, or we cannot approve it. So I'll go into them a little closer here in a second, but this is the direction we're heading from all of our H2 Ohio voluntary nutrient management plans, and we've had pretty good acceptance from a lot of ag retailers up here in Northwest Ohio. And so we're hoping that we can that use of a nutrient management plan can spread throughout the state. So one of the important aspects of a nutrient management plan is you are not afforded protections of having a voluntary nutrient management plan unless you are maintaining records to say that you're following that nutrient management plan. So you do get the benefit of several legal benefits from having a nutrient management plan. But if you are not doing the record keeping required, there's nothing saying you are following your new nutrient management plan. So the wording in revised code is substantial compliance. So they say that you have a nutrient management plan and that you are in substantial compliance with that nutrient management plan. So I just wanted to quickly put up these record keeping requirements on there. And so the other thing is that any person can develop a nutrient management plan for anybody else. They can request another person to develop a nutrient management plan for them. They also can request the supervisors of the Board of Soil and Waters to write a nutrient management plan for them. So this is where we Soil and Water, I say Soil and Water, falls into place, is that any person can come and request that a district to write a nutrient management plan, and the district should be able to write a nutrient management plan. In some situations, if we do not have staff to write a nutrient management plan or don't have the time, we can tell them no, but we would like for you at least to take a stab at it. And that's one of the reasons we put together this OVNMP spreadsheet, was to provide you a tool that could simply put in a soil test, you put in the crop rotations, and we can start writing a nutrient management plan for them. And so this is a part of the responsibilities of the board and the soil and water staff there, is to write them if they can. All right. So the other responsibility is if a nutrient management plan is turned into a board, it is their responsibility to approve or disapprove that plan. And so we would encourage the boards to review that plan. If they don't feel comfortable, we would encourage the district staff or technicians there at Soil and Water to review that plan and give them guidance on whether they should approve that plan or not. But I just wanted to start off on giving some of the overview of what we're talking about when we're talking about a nutrient management plan in Ohio, and where we're at with approving those. So with that, I'm going to quickly fly through these other ones because we've kind of already hit them. But that's the front page of the Ohio Nutrient Workbook. Like I said, 1-year plan, updated yearly. The CNMP, I think this is a slightly older version of the cover sheet, but it's a much higher level of learning. I think we only have a handful of CNMP certified technicians out there that NRCS says can write or CNMPs. And so we're always looking for additional people out there to write CNMPs. So if that's something you want to do, please contact your NRCS or your DC and see what steps you need to take to get that certification going. But like I said, it's a large learning curve. We have had a lot of people interested this recently, so hopefully we can get some additional training out there in the near future and get some other people CNMP certified. The final one is that form that I've been talking about, and it's that spreadsheet that we put together a handful of years ago, and primarily we've simplified it to the extent that we could to identify the soil test, identify the crops, and then start planting the nutrients that are needed to meet the recommendations of that plan. And so we put this sheet together, I think in 2016, and we've kept it updated. And we most recently, because of H2 Ohio and some rules changes, we had to add a year. Previously, it was a 3-year plan. Now it's a 4-year plan. And so we have made some updates to it, and we're constantly updating it. With this new tri-state coming out, we'll do some additional updates on it, and we'll let you guys know when a new version is available. The March 11th version is the most recent one that I put out there right prior or during our rollout meetings of H2 Ohio. And so we've put that most recent version out there, and we were waiting on the new tri-state and 590 before we put another version out there. So if you're wondering if you have the most recent version, that 311 version is the most recent version. So we've been going over this a lot when it comes to what are the expectations of what should be in that nutrient management plan. And so with that spreadsheet that we have, there's also another spreadsheet in there that is called the VRT review tool. And based on what we see from ag retailers, we can document a couple things that may not be documented in their plan, and we can consider that a nutrient management plan. And so I will go through what our expectations are for those. We can use just this sheet right there, and you provide us a map, and we have a nutrient management plan. We have the crop rotation, we have an average soil test, we have the nutrients that they plan on applying, and that is a nutrient management plan. We are all set. If a producer wanted to use this, if you as a technician wanted to write a nutrient management plan, that would be perfectly fine from our standpoint. That is a nutrient management plan. What we typically see up here in Northwest Ohio are very nice variable rate maps, and we have a wide acceptance of variable rate fertilizer application. And so we see variable rate prescription maps with them that are following tri-state, that are giving us 90% what we need. And so what we do is use that VRT review tool to check a couple spots in the field, check the product they're applying, and then see if that meets our requirements for a nutrient management plan. So if they are applying to tri-state, they have their soil test done, we can tell you what and how, where they're putting their nutrients, then we have a nutrient management plan. Some of the times, or what we've seen these ag retailers do is then also provide us like this farm summary. So on the right side of your screen, more or less, they've started providing us what is that general on that farm, what do they do? What do they do on that farm nutrient management wise? So we like to see, okay, they're doing corn, they have 175 bushel yield goal, they put starter on at 5 gallons, they have side dress 28 at per recommendation, and then what other nutrients are they applying? So that spells a lot of that out for us from the reviewer standpoint and makes it more simple for us to review. And so we've had pretty wide acceptance of something similar to this go on as a cover sheet for our nutrient management plans. And so I'll quickly go through what else we might see in those nutrient management plans, just so you guys have at least a quick view of what we're looking for if we're going to review a nutrient management plan and consider using it with that VRT tool. So like I said, the summary would be the first thing. The next thing would be the actual soil test. That soil test is going to be the foundation of that nutrient management plans. It's where we're going to start with all those nutrient management decisions. To go along with that, I would like to see a soil test map report that's going to spell out, okay, this is where we took the samples. The example I have up there is a gridded soil sample on 2.5 acre grids. I can quickly say, okay, spot 15 is here, and I can see that phosphorus level number there in that format. Or I can also refer back to the soil test and look at that soil test. And so those two, that's our foundation of that nutrient management plan. The next thing would be that recommendation map. So you're going to have a P and a K recommendation map, and typically our ag retailers do a good job of getting us quite a lot of the information on there. And so I have some things highlighted in red that says the operation. It says 180 bushel corn and it says 60 beans. So they're probably making a 2-year application. So I can compare those application rates with what a nutrient management plan would say and see if they're following tri-state. And so these are very nice maps, and if an ag retailer can provide these, we do not have to rewrite that nutrient management plan. We can use the tool or use the reports that they already turn into us, and we can utilize that to write that nutrient management plan. So we have had a large learning curve up here in Northwest Ohio, and so we've got a lot of ag retailers providing us this information, but we still have a long ways to go for getting really good information from everyone. And so I just wanted to provide a few examples of what we were looking at, how we would use it, and I'll quickly go through that VRT review tool at the end if there's time. So just some other examples. A soil test point map tells us where it is. There's a soil test lab report, shows us what, and then a map. One very nice thing with these maps is, so we have the P soil test levels up there on the top left, and then we have the soil test or the phosphorus recommendation map. And so we can quickly see the red areas on the soil test results and correspond that to the application rates, and we can see that they're opposite. And so A red area shows that it has higher soil tests, and a green area shows that it's getting zero or a much lower recommendation. And so we can quickly identify those two maps that, yep, they're probably shutting off per tri-state, and we have a good idea on what they're doing on that farm. Very similarly, this is a K map, K recommendation map, and it shows us those rates, and it gives us that information that we need. So I'm going to take a quick drink real quick and kind of get into this the 590 and the tri-state updates, and kind of let you know where we're at with all of that. So I think it was probably about July, a new tri-state was released. It had not been updated in 25 plus years. So they thought it was time to update tri-state. And with that, when we update tri-state, 590 refers to tri-state. So it was also a good time to update the 590 standard. And so the 590 standard is not official as far as I know, but comments were required to be in a couple weeks ago. Maybe it's been a month by now, but we will see a new 590 here pretty shortly. And so I wanted to at least inform everyone on some of the changes that were made in tri-state. Probably the most notable one was the removal of drawdown. And so on the bottom right, that was the scheme for tri-state previously. We had a buildup range, a maintenance range, and a drawdown range. And so in that maintenance range, we were applying the nutrients that we were removing. If we were above that maintenance limit, we were applying less than what the crop was removing. And so we had this drawdown range, and ultimately it would get to 0, but the new tri-state now does not have that drawdown range. And so we have a buildup range. So we're putting what crop removal is and then plus some, and we're usually building up over 4 years. But then in that maintenance range, we're applying only what the crop is removing, and then beyond that range is no apply. And this is a pretty big shift from what we're used to, because based on the research of tri-state, there's no economic reason or agronomic reason to apply additional fertilizer. I'll go into the economics here in a second, but there's no need to apply additional fertilizer. And so with the economics of it, so these are some of the data points that they took in when they started analyzing the P&K economic return on investment to determine where should we set those numbers for nutrient for our critical level and our maintenance levels. And so I don't know if you can see my mouse, but you can see a red line there. And this was the information as of last year. And so the red line identifies the critical level, and the critical level is the point where we would say there's not any yield limiting factors based on phosphorus. And so potassium, similarly, you're going to see it at 100, and we would say that there are no limiting factors for yield based on that line. And so you can see that we even have much lower soil tests that will get us up to that 90-95% of economic return on it. And so there's very little chance with a soil test that low that you would see economic impact. And so that helps us establish that critical level for P and K when we're looking at, okay, what are soil test results? Is there a reason to put on fertilizer? And if we're not seeing an economic response to putting on fertilizer, why are we putting it on? One other big change that there is tri-state and the 590 will all be in Malic 3. Previously, tri-state was based off a BRAE-P1 soil test for phosphorus and ammonium acetate typically for potassium. But for phosphorus now, it will primarily be Malic 3. And previously, to do a Malic to Bray conversion, there was a conversion that within Tri-State that we could use to convert Malic to Bray, and we utilized that in that VNMP spreadsheet, and it's still in there. But now with an update that we now might have to convert Bray to Malic. And so I just wanted to make you guys aware that this is the conversion. It's a pretty simple conversion. To get Bray to Malic, you multiply it by 1.35. To get Malic to Bray, you divide by 1.35. And so it's very simple to make that conversion. When we do updates to the spreadsheet, it'll do the conversion for you automatically, but you should be aware that you may have to do some conversion based on the soil test that you are given. Soil test labs primarily do their phosphorus testing in Malic 3. We still do have a couple in Ohio that do the Bray test, but Bray is a far more expensive test, and so it's advantageous to them to run Malic 3. We do still, and we similarly with potassium, we still do see the ammonium acetate test, but we typically probably see a lot of Malic 3 because Malic 3 can test a lot of nutrients and give us that information we need. And so be aware of this. We'll try to make it as easy as possible with that spreadsheet to make it easy to do a conversion if needed. But when we're talking about Malic 3, these numbers are going to be different than what we're used to when we were looking at Tri-State. The next thing that really changed was the amount of nutrients that are removed. So I have just the P and K up here, but you can see the amount different that P and K are removed. And so corn, we had a 5% reduction going from 0.37 to 0.35. It's probably not that large of a deal, but when we look at K2O going from the 0.27 down to the 0.20, that's 26%. So that's a much larger amount of K2O that we are no longer removing. And that's going to make a difference on the nutrients that we need to replace. Wheat was probably the biggest mover when we look at it, going from 0.63 down to 0.50 for potassium, 22% reduction. And then K2O was a really big one on wheat, was that 32% reduction in the amount of pounds that we are removing for a bushel of grain. That wheat does not include stover, so if stover is added into that equation, that rate's probably going to go up quite a bit if we start removing the stover for wheat, because that's where a lot of that potassium is held. But when we start looking at the actual recommendations, you're going to see a lot of similarities in it. Yes, we're using a new soil test. We're using new numbers. But in general, when we review these numbers, if we are looking at them one to one, the numbers for their recommendation are going to be pretty similar. We're going to have slight modifications in it, but typically we're going to be in that realm of being right, just based on those numbers, those reductions, and that the change in the Malic 3 from Bray. But if we compare some of our numbers, so we're in a maintenance range for 180 bushel corn, we're at 65. If we go over to the maintenance range of corn, and we're in that maintenance of between 20 and 40, and we were at 180 bushel corn, we'd be in between 55 and 70. That's going to be very close to that 65 pound recommendation that we have for 180 bushel corn. So a lot has changed, but it's also remained the same. The biggest difference is going to be that Malic soil test. Similarly, the phosphorus recommendations for soybeans are going to be very similar too. They're going to fall in that realm where they're still pretty close. If you look at our lowest soil test up here, and we're at 60 pound or a 70 pound of, so 105. We have our lowest soil test here, 10 or below. The recommendation is 105, the same recommendation that we had previously. So that is nice when we're looking at these charts. As far as I know, there is not a hard copy of Tri-State out, but they're on the website. And if you didn't have a chance to write it down, you can go to the website I have listed here. I'll give you a second to take that down. But you can find all this information on that website. And so they have everything broken down into categories. But as far as I know, I looked around yesterday, I could not find a PDF of it. There was a link that said go to their website where they sell it, and I could not find anything on that website. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have one out shortly, but as of right now, I don't think we have a paper copy out currently. So I think you have to go only to that website for that. So if we take this is all now going into that 30,000 foot view of nutrient management and why it is the way it is. And so Tri-State is built on that critical level, and we have a build and maintain. And so if we are below that critical level, we want to build up to that critical level. And then once we are in that maintenance level, then we want to maintain that by putting back what the crop removes. And so all of that theory goes into those equations that are built into Tri-State, and that leads us to where we are with those equations. And so those numbers are based on this assumption that for 20 pounds of phosphate removal, we can move a soil test 1. For K2O, it's 6 to 10 pounds, depending on the CEC, that we can move that soil test 1 part per million. And so if we look at an example of it, 200 bushel corn, these are the updated numbers for Tri-State. If we were looking at the old ones, it would be 74 pounds of P2O5. The new one's slightly lower. So we're looking at 200 bushel corn removes about 70 pounds of P2O5. So if we're taking 70 pounds of P2O5 and we're dividing that by, or we just take that 70 pounds and divide that by that 20, we have that 20-to-1 ratio, then we can move a soil test 3 to 4 parts per million per year. And so if we think about that okay, even if our soil test is really high, we're only going to bring down that soil test 3 to 4 parts per million per year. And so when we start thinking at long-term management, it really is eye-opening on how little a very good, I would say 200 bushel corn is a very good corn crop. We really only affect that soil test very little. So K2O, very similarly, 200 bushel corn takes about 50 pounds of K2O off that field. And so we can move that soil test about 5 to 8.3 parts per million per year. And so if we're doing if we're looking at that, we're going, okay, why is there a ratio? Why do we have 20-to-1 or that 6 to 10 with potassium? Primarily, it's because when we do soil testing, we're trying to determine the amount that should be available there for that crop. We're using an extractant, and we've calibrated those soil tests so that they're showing approximately how much should be available for that crop. In any soil across Ohio, you're going to have 500 to 1,500 pounds of phosphorus available or within that soil per acre. That changes all the time. Moisture affects that. If we're constantly getting rain, we can get that nutrient into that crop. If the pH is off, that phosphate may be tighter on the irons and aluminums in the soil, and so they might not be available. Temperatures, huge. When we look at wheat management and our other grass crops that are growing in the cooler time of years, typically we have a higher rate that we would manage for, because they're growing at a time when phosphorus is less available. As those soils warm up, that phosphorus becomes more available. Soil health, when we look at our nutrient cycling and all of that, and everything going on that's associated with soil health, that has a large impact on how available those nutrients are. Organic matter, we get nutrients from organic matter. As that organic matter breaks down, those nutrients become available. And then ultimately fertilizer, when we add fertilizer, those nutrients are more available to that crop. For K, we typically see between 10 and 20,000 pounds of potassium that's out there that could become available, and we only need 100 pounds of potassium out there for that crop, but we have 10,000 to 20,000 that could be available. There's a lot of potassium out there, and I think one of the things that they've identified with this new tri-state and doing this research is that we may not know as much about potassium as we thought we have. And so I think we will continue to see a lot of potassium research moving forward, so we can hopefully get a better understanding of potassium, because a lot of it seems to move more like nitrogen than it does like phosphorus. So we'll continue to see some research with potassium, I'm sure. So to go through all those ideas one last time, I wanted to look at a rotation. And so when we talk about crop rotation, I want to look at corn, soybean, wheat, primarily what we would have traditionally seen in Ohio. Would have been a corn, soybean, wheat rotation. I know it's less common today than it was 20 years ago, but when we can compare that, I think it's still relatable to a lot of people. We still see some wheat out there, but I want to show the amounts that each crop would be removing, and then create a scenario. Okay, my soil test is 200 parts per million, and I want to bring it down to a 50 parts per million soil test. And so I want to quickly go through that and kind of show this idea of how long it would take, or how many bushels it would take to bring a 200 part per million soil test down to a 50 parts per million soil test. A 50 part per million soil test is still a relatively high soil test, but that's getting in the range where we would likely see less offsite movement into our water bodies, and that's where we would want to manage our soil test to 50 or below to reduce that environmental impact. So on the right side of that P205 removed in grain, those were the tri-state 1995 numbers. And so with this rotation, we'd be removing about 189 pounds of phosphate. With the new tri-state, we're removing less phosphate based on the research that they had done. So I updated this slide based on that research and that 172 pounds of P205 removed. And so if we're removing that 172 pounds and we go back to that 20-to-1 ratio, we can move our soil test 8.6 parts per million per rotation. And so for those 3 years, we can take our soil test down from that, from our 200 parts per million, and we're trying to get down to that 50 parts per million. So we have to remove 150 parts per million. So if we take that 150 divided by that 8.6, that's a 3-year rotation, it would take 17.2 rotations to get down to 50 parts per million. That is a long time, 52 years to get from a 200 part per million soil test to a 50 parts per million soil test. That is all theoretical. That is all based on that assumption of that 20-to-1 ratio, but there's a lot of information there to take in when we look at that number. But we also want to consider that on a large scale, that it takes a long time to manage our nutrients. And so it took a lifetime to build that up, and it's going to take a lifetime to probably bring it down. So if we start talking about bushels, so how many bushels do need to be removed to get that soil test from that 200 down to that 50? So we're removing 150 parts per million at that 20 pounds of P2O5. That's 3,000 pounds of P2O5. So we take that 3,000 pounds and divide it by the removal rate of corn, and that's 0.35. And so we need to remove per acre 8,500 bushels of corn. And so I updated those numbers. And so if we would run continuous corn on those fields and have 175 bushel corn, then it's going to take 49 years. If we can really bump that crop up and do 225 bushel years, it only takes 38 years. And so when we think about how long a farmer farms, very few farmers are going to farm more than 40 years. And so it's that idea of thinking that this is a long-term management. So if we have high soil tests, we really need to start applying less than what we're removing. Otherwise, we're never going to bring that soil test down to levels that are more environmental friendly. So some of the big takeaways that we want to make you think about is that per rotation, we take away about 55 to 70 pounds of P2O5. When we're primarily looking at a nutrient management, got a message saying we're cutting out a little bit. So on average, we're removing 55 to 70 pounds. We need to think about that per year. Are we putting on more or less than that 55 pounds? Are we putting on removal? Are we putting on more? Or are we putting on less? And so we really need to think about that idea when we're looking at nutrient management. Ultimately, if we're putting on equal amounts, we're going to maintain our soil test. If we're putting on less than crop removal, we're probably going to be drawing down our soil test. If we're putting on more, we're probably going to be building up our soil test. So we really need to think about that and have that larger aspect on nutrient management before we make that decision of what we're trying to accomplish. Are we trying to maintain it, or are we trying to draw it down or build it up? And so with that, I'm kind of wrap up all that idea, but that's our primarily our idea that we want to focus on when we're looking at nutrient management. What are we trying to accomplish based on those soil tests? And so I guess with that, I'll take some questions if we have any, Tim, and feel free to use the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask a question that way also.
Kip, we had a few come in through the chat box.
Okay.
When we're talking about converting between the different test methods for phosphorus, does it matter whether we're starting from parts per million or pounds per acre on those?
No, so the conversion from parts per million to pounds per acre, if we're going from pounds per acre to parts per million, you divide by 2. If you're going from parts per million to pounds per acre, you times by 2. And that's all based on an assumption that soil weighs, or an acre of furrow slice weighs about 2 million pounds. And so as long as we divide by 2 or multiply 2 to get the desired number, then we should be fine. Even with the Malick and Bray, that shouldn't impact any of that. So we should be fine just dividing or multiplying by 2. Just make sure you do that number correctly. And I probably should have put that slide in, but I pulled it out yesterday when I was putting it in there. So just make sure you know what conversion you're trying to make. And if I can't answer it, one of those engineers will tell you how to do some math.
Do nutrient management plans include pesticide application, or are they strictly for fertilizer manure application?
Nutrient management plans are primarily, or we're only looking at the fertilizer and nutrients being applied. Pesticides falls outside of that. There are certain times when some pesticides, herbicides, all of that would be corresponding with a nutrient application, and we would want that accounted for in a nutrient management plan. But when we're doing a nutrient management plan, we are not accounting for the herbicides, pesticides as they're going out.
All right. Can you describe the certification process for nutrient management plans?
So the certification process, we do not have a certification process in the state of Ohio for nutrient management plans. We do have an approval process, and we would describe that approval process as a district staff member or board members review that. And so we put a lot of training out there to try to make you feel comfortable reviewing nutrient management plans so you can recommend to your board to approve that nutrient management plan. If you do not feel comfortable, or your board does not feel comfortable reviewing that nutrient management plan, then get a hold of ODA, and we will either have someone review it to provide a recommendation to approve it, or we can go ahead and approve that nutrient management plan in general. Typically, we would want the board to approve that nutrient management plan. It sits in your county. Those acres are probably covered under your county. Ideally, the nutrient management plans should be approved by the district, but in certain situations, if you don't feel comfortable, let us know.
Okay. We had a question on where can somebody get a hold of the ODA VNMP? Is it available on our website, or where can they get it?
It is not available on the website. Please email me if you would like a copy of it. Most people who are utilizing it email me pretty regularly just to make sure there's not a new copy. Prior to COVID, we were out doing very similar presentations pretty frequently, and so we would let it know when updates were going out, or we'd send an email. But yes, we have not sent an update since March, and so if you have the March version, you're fine. But if you need a new copy, my email is there on the screen. Please send me an email for the latest version.
And we had a few people that were wondering if this PowerPoint itself would be available if they wanted a copy of it. Can you send that around, Kip?
Send me an email. That's probably a better way to do it, so I'm not just sending it out to everyone. Send me an email if you'd like a copy. I'll make a PDF of it, and I'll send you a copy back your way. And if you would like additional information, I know I have some other ones that break down the previous tri-state a little more to give you different scenarios based on drawdown, build up, and go through those equations a little more. Ultimately, we would like to get back to a more formal setting with classroom settings, and we can probably run that nutrient management TDP, but it'll probably be later next year if we are able to do that. So I hope that at some point we can get back to a classroom setting and do that 2-day course again for those that want to learn more about nutrient management. But we want to at least provide you something and let you know where resources are for getting nutrient management information.
And this webinar has been recorded, and we'll post that up on our ODA YouTube website where we have some of our other webinars posted.
Okay.
Does anybody have any other questions they want to see covered? We have another one here. Let's see. Retailer FERT recommendations and as applied maps will suffice as a VNMP still need to be approved by the board. I don't know if that's a question, Mike, or just a comment.
I would agree with the comment. Yes, if the fertilizer recs follow tri-state and their as applied maps are turned in, that would meet that requirement. The only thing to consider is that they've met those minimum requirements that I'd identified. For soil test 4 years and older, that method and seasonal time is usually the point that's lacking. And we would like to see those nutrient management plans approved before those applications are actually applied, but if you have those application records, that's going to prove your method and seasonal timing also. So yeah, we have in large part said that a fertilizer REX and their as applied maps would meet the requirements of a nutrient management plan, but it still needs to go to that board to get approval.
Thanks, Kip. One last chance for any more questions, whether through the chat or if you want to unmute your mic.
Well, if there's no additional questions, I guess I would like to thank everyone for attending today. If you have any specific nutrient management questions, please let me know. We do have a lot of technical staff out there, and a program specialist should be able to answer some of your nutrient management questions. But if you have a more specific one or need something, please let me know. We'll try to get you some answers.
All right, thanks, Kip. And with that, we'll wrap it up for the day.